everybody. Hey, Sarge, how are you doing?
I am doing really good. I'm glad to be here with you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here. This was actually Sarge's idea, so I am so grateful and thrilled to see you here. And welcome everyone in chat. Hello. I hope you're having a good Saturday night. So as you can see, we have a special guest, Prepping with Sarge, an awesome channel on YouTube. It's also over on Instagram. And today we're going to be talking about the Thwaites Glacier, the Doomsday Glacier in Antarctica. Sarge, would you mind introducing yourself in case anyone in the chat has not seen your channel yet?
Yeah, I see a lot of familiar faces in chat. Awesome. It's good to see everybody coming back out. I think you and I have a lot of mutual friends.
Yeah.
But for anyone who hasn't seen my channel yet, I talk a lot about foraging and financial preparedness and things like that. Lately, I've been on an AI kick, so that's been my thing, is helping the prepper community be aware of like what's going on with the AI world. I think if you're not watching tech news, you might not realize like how advanced that's come. So I've got another video coming along about that on Tuesday, and it will have, like the topic that we're going to talk about today, there's some things that we are going to see in the next 50 years or less. It's coming, and it's going to have a pretty big impact on our world. So I'm talking about AI, not so much the Thwaites Glacier. Yeah, I'm on YouTube, Prepping with Sarge, and I'm over on Instagram, prepping_with_Sarge. And if you're new to my channel, just leave me a little comment or whatever, so I can get to know you a little bit. And if you've got a channel, I'll try to go check out yours.
Yeah, awesome. Well, so what we're here for today is we are going to talk about the Thwaites Glacier. We're hoping to bring awareness to the topic of the Doomsday Glacier and the Western Antarctic Glacier generally. What this live stream is that just an awareness of another hazard in the world. What it is not is a debate about climate change, which is mostly political issue. So that's what this isn't, but the hazard itself is what we're here to talk about. My background, I have some degrees in geological science. I've mapped many glaciers for work and for research purposes. I've even fallen in one, and I've been rescued out of one. However, Antarctica is not my specialty. This live stream follows some major research that was released in February of 2023, which is one of the things that we're talking about. There are two seminal papers published in the journal Nature, which is one of the biggest journals, most well-respected journals in the world. So the links to some of that research is below in case you want to check it out. And Sarge, can you tell us a little bit about what interests you about this topic?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in the Doomsday Glacier, and of course, when the new research came out in February, I jumped right on that, and knew that I wanted to talk about this, but I don't have the scientific background to hit on it like you can, so that's why I wanted to get you in on this so that we could work together. I live on a coastal city. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, and this is definitely a concern for my city. Whether or not it happens in while I'm still alive is questionable. We'll get to some of the timeline stuff, but any coastal city is going to be dealing with this at some point and the impacts of it. So that's my main interest. Is I think we all should take a vested interest in like what threats are in your area. Obviously, hurricanes is a big one for me. Flooding is a constant threat in my area. This would take flooding to a whole new level.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, why don't we get starting to think about glaciers and visualize the Western Antarctic ice sheet a little bit, and we'll just take a look at this video right here. Hello, we're back. So the Thwaites Glacier itself is located in Western Antarctica, and it's known to be, quote, the weak underbelly of the Western Antarctic ice sheet because of its apparent vulnerability to significant retreat. And the surface speeds of this glacier at the moment are exceeding 2 kilometers a year. And I don't know if there's anything you want to add at this point, Sarge.
Yeah, I mean, just seeing that video, the scale of it, right? Like, I think that's what's hard for when you read about it. You think, okay, big deal. A piece of glacier breaks off into the ocean. It's the scale of it that's the issue. The sheer size of it,
Hmm.
which will have an impact on the entire world, but mostly the coastal cities. The the thought is right that the warming of the ocean temperatures is what's accelerating this, right? Like, so there probably was for millions of years a cycle of growth and retreat, right? Wintertime, it would grow. Summertime, it would retreat. But now the retreat is far exceeding the growth of it, at least on the western side of Antarctica, right? So I
Hmm.
know there's people will say, well, other parts of the world are gaining ice, and yes, that actually is true, but this specific region of Western Antarctica is why this is an issue. It's when you understand it's not just about how much ice the planet has, although that's a factor too. But when this sheet breaks off, and it's a when, it's not an if, unless something drastically changes. When this sheet
Hmm.
breaks off, it's what I read is that the sheet itself before the after effect, right? The after effect, there's two stages to this. There's the sheet, and then there's
Hmm.
the after effect. The sheet itself would cause a 4 foot rise in the ocean waters. Is that what you read as well?
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So it would really, the collapse of the glacier would trigger a chain reaction, leading to also the collapse of the surrounding glaciers. And so current numbers are, it amounts to 4% of global sea level rise. But in the short term, it could be up to 5%, but then accelerating further on the long term. And the biggest issue is the basal crevasses and the cracks propagating and melting, leading to further collapse. So there's some good news. So these studies that have just come out, the good news is the overall glacier is melting slower than they were expecting.
That's good.
However, the bad news is that it's the bottom crevasses and cracks that are propagating in like a feedback of more and more and more melting, and that's the problem.
And when you see any kind of videos of a glacier collapse, there's the slow melt, which is not really noticeable over a period of time because it happens so slow. But when you see the cracks cause a giant piece of it to collapse, then you get a whole lot of ice
Hmm.
splashing down all at once. And that's the fear, right? Like that
Hmm.
it's not just going to slowly melt into the ocean, which we might actually have time to adapt to that as it's happening. It's going it
Hmm.
When it breaks, it's going to be sudden.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many people here. Thanks, guys, for spending some time with us tonight. Prepper Dog is here, Creative Redundancy, who has designed the logo that we're using up in the top corner is here. Arc Wildman Survival, good to see you. Freedom by Me Homesteading, thanks for stopping by. And Winter Homestead, we see you there. Nene, hello, welcome. And My Mother Spark is also here. She just had a live not too long ago, so you can go catch the replay of that after if you haven't already seen it. And again, thank you to the mods for dropping links. And thank you to the invisible mods that are here. I know you're here. And if anyone hasn't subscribed to Sarge's channel, definitely find the link in the chat or check the description box for a link to his channel.
Thank you.
So yeah, so let's talk about these studies that they were doing that just came out in the literature. They were using a PlayStation 3 controller to put a robot down into the glacier and take measurements. And one of the big things that they noticed was that the melted surface had a scalloped appearance as opposed to a smooth appearance. And that scalloped appearance was indicative of a quick melting, a quicker than usual or quicker than expected melting along these crevasses and these basal fractures on the glacier. So as this glacier is receding, um, if it becomes dislodged to the seabed that is keeping it currently somewhat stable, that's what can lead to its, um, you know, further demise, basically.
Would that so in your reading, I had a hard time finding anything on this. Or is there thoughts that it could create any kind of tsunami if a big enough piece broke off?
I didn't read
You
about
didn't see
that.
anything like that either? Okay.
No, I didn't see. But I mean, that sort of thing does happen, but that wasn't one of the big hazards that it seems that this glacier in the news is it's more the sea level rise. And I did see a lot of conflicting timelines, which I
Mhm.
think you're going to talk about when this could take place. The bottom line, in my opinion, is it's not something I'm like super worried about. It's just one of the things to be aware of that's happening on Earth at the moment. Did you want to talk about the timelines at all?
Yeah, yeah, I've seen everything from within the next 10, 15 years to over 100 years, you know.
Yeah.
It's the models vary quite a bit and the so for those of you who live in hurricane areas, you know what I mean by models, right? Like so there's literally dozens and dozens of different computer simulations of how a hurricane could hit an area, and it usually doesn't even like tighten up until like the last 24 hours or so, unfortunately. So for example, being in South Carolina in the Charleston area, we may know, okay, there's a hurricane in the Atlantic, it's going to hit anywhere from Cuba to Virginia, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then so we have to start paying attention to it, and every couple hours we're checking the news for the latest update and adjusting our preps accordingly. The and it won't, really it isn't until it gets close to landfall that they can really tighten that model down. So that's part of the problem here with this. If you think about the different models, and they're trying to figure in variables that are really hard to account for, because the ocean waters are heating up at such a degree right now. In 5 years, are they accelerating even more? In 10 years, are they accelerating even more? Right. So there's worst case scenario, which they guess 10, 15 years. Best case scenario, 100 or more years, in which case that gives us a whole lot more time to prepare. Maybe Sarge won't even be here to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the groups that's been researching this is the International Thwaites Glacier Collaboration. It's a partnership between the US and the UK academic institution. And these studies have raised the alarm regarding glacier collapse. And the number that's floating around a lot is this 3-foot rise in sea level. But if the entire Antarctica melted, that would account for about a 10-foot sea level rise. That has happened. Like the glaciers have been smaller in the past. They've also been way bigger in the past, which we've seen if we're old enough, like I am. The glaciers have been bigger, but they've also been smaller. So that's important to know. But um, yeah, the numbers I'm seeing about this glacier are a 3-foot sea level rise. Is that sort of what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I've read up to 4, but then the
Yeah,
second part of it, which was even more concerning, is that the Thwaites Glacier is blocking a whole lot of other ice from slipping into the ocean, right? So
yeah,
so the thought is, if the Thwaites Glacier breaks off, it's going to start a catastrophic chain reaction in
yeah,
western Antarctica that's going to put a whole lot more ice into the ocean. And the estimates with that I saw was up to 17 feet, on in addition to
yeah,
the original 4 feet. So you're talking a 21-foot rise in sea level. That's biblical.
yeah, yeah,
That's bye bye New Orleans, bye bye LA, bye bye Amsterdam, bye bye Dubai, bye bye Charleston, bye bye Savannah, bye bye all of Florida. It would be pretty bad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely something um, to think about. And, one of the ways we know that the ocean has been higher in the past is, for example, the Hawaiian Islands, which are pretty young, relatively speaking. There are, coral deposits quite high up on some of the hillsides they haven't been moved tectonically. They were deposited there when sea levels were higher. But a big thing that's a problem here is the rate of change, right? It's this all happening on these short time scales, which is um, unusual, right? Would you agree, Sarge?
Unusual, and they're, throughout humanity's history, for the 7,000 years or so of civilization and 300,000 so years of Homo sapiens, humans tend to live by the ocean, and there's a reason for that. It's good for trade. There's abundance of biodiversity at where the ocean meets the land, right? In permaculture, for those of you who are permaculture fans, there's an expression in permaculture which is abundance of biodiversity exists at the edges, which literally means where two ecosystems meet, you're going to find the greatest amount of biodiversity, including humans, right? The majority of humans live in coastal areas. Um, that's bad news for this situation.
Yeah, exactly.
if
Well,
if you live
maybe,
if you live high in a mountain in Appalachia, this probably isn't too much of a concern for you, at least in terms of survival. In terms of how it would change everything in the world, it still should be a concern.
yes. Okay, a couple things here. Dragon Slayer. Wait, what did I just hear? Bye bye, Florida. What's going on?
So I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not really. And this is probably not, at least the 21 feet that we were talking about before is not something that I don't think any of us are going to see in our lifetime. That
Yep,
I can't promise you that, but that's what my understanding of the research, that the second half of that, the ice that is protected and blocked from going into the ocean by the Thwaites Glacier, would take 100 or so more years to make its way into the ocean by the models.
yep,
Um, so, but yeah, we were talking about when that happens, unless something happens that drastically changes it, which could, maybe we change things that we do that allows for that to not happen, or not happen as quickly. Maybe there's ways to slow that down. But when it happens, we would be talking about by the models, which is, you could say that there's some discrepancy there, sure.
yep,
Uh, 21-foot rise in sea level, which is going to put any state that has coastal property in quite a bit of danger of flooding.
yep.
And they also think, we're not really hitting on this too much tonight, but they also think just that would actually change the weather around the entire planet.
Yep. Yeah, and you're affecting the thermohaline circulation of the ocean, so you're adding fresh water to a saline system, so you're going to affect the currents as well. And that's something that's been documented and studied in previous deglaciations. So there's a question. So basically, Cold War preppers wondering. So if you have an ice cube in a cup and it's floating, and then changing the level, basically, a, there's a whole bunch of water held up in Antarctica on land. So it's sticking into the ocean, but a lot of it is sitting up on land. And so when that comes down into the ocean, it's going to raise the level that way. But there's a feedback effect because the water that's sitting at the base of the Thwaites Glacier is one of the big things that they noticed is it's very warm water relatively. So it's warm water, warmer than expected. I think, what did they say? Um, 2 degrees Celsius above the freezing temperature that's sitting there and getting through the cracks and helping melt the ice. Um, and then basically unsticking it where it's lodged onto the seafloor. And then it has a feedback effect where more and more cracks, more and more melting. And then it comes down.
Yeah, so it's to use the ice cube in the glass metaphor. We're not really talking about like a couple ice cubes floating in a glass of water. It's more like if you had a glass of water. Let's see if I get in the camera here. A glass of water, and then you had the ice cubes kind of tipping out like that, and then behind here you've got a whole tray full of ice cubes, right? So then when this one breaks off and goes in, there's nothing to stop. Whoops, there's nothing to stop the rest of it from overflowing.
Oh, I like it. You should make a video demonstrating
Okay, I'll see what I can do.
that. um, so what else is in the chat? Dragon Slayer is here. Jean is here. A landslide glacier that falls into the ocean help with the rising temperatures. A landslide glacier that falls into the ocean help with the rising temperatures. I don't know if I fully understand that one.
I mean, it probably for the short term would cool the ocean waters a little bit, especially in that region. Uh, I don't know how long that would last. Like a glass, another glass of ice metaphor, right? A glass of ice at room temperature is eventually going to come back up to room temperature.
Yeah.
But again, this is all speculation. Some of this stuff that we're talking about, we're using metaphors and things like that. That's it's not hard science, and I imagine it would drastically change the weather on the planet. How long? I don't know. Do you have any sense for that?
How long it would change it?
Yeah. So there is so the direct impacts on sea level, yes, the melting of the Thwaites Glacier could also have indirect impacts on the global climate patterns and ocean currents, disrupting ecosystems around the climate in unpredictable ways. That's what my research said.
Yeah. Well, I mean, then there are so many variables that are associated with the change in the circulation of the ocean and all the weather patterns that are linked to that. It's just, there's more storms, and then you get into the whole the outcomes of climate change and because that's, it's all related to that. That's what, Anyway, so yeah, I wanted to ask you, Sarge, like, does this topic change the way you prep at all?
My plan is I really don't want to leave Charleston. I love it here. We're very happy here, but I do worry about I worry about flooding just when we get rainstorms here. And if for people who don't live in a coastal area, it might be hard to conceptualize that. But a 4-foot storm surge, which is not unusual when we get a hurricane, causes some pretty damaging flooding in my city. Right, a 12-foot storm surge you're talking millions of dollars in damage, and so to imagine that it was permanent, right? Like that would literally neighborhoods that exist here would no longer be able, they would not be livable, right? And how far inland that goes, I can't answer that, but it would definitely impact our historic district, which is basically right on the harbor, right at sea level. In fact, those areas frequently take hurricane damage as it is, and sometimes just when it's raining during a full moon, they'll flood pretty bad. If they call it king tide, if the tide is just right during the lunar cycle, and then we get a little bit of rain on top of that. In fact, I lost a vehicle here in a flash flood since I moved here. Happened in minutes. I know that's hard if you don't live in an area that's prone to that stuff. It's hard to understand, but the water can come up to chest level in minutes. It's real fast.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is on your mind, on your radar.
Oh yeah. So is it changing my prepping? The only real way that I can think to prep for this is try to educate people, and maybe if I wanted to move, but I don't want to move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, exactly. We're all established in our areas, and I can see in the chat that my mother's Fark says that she's in your area, in the
Yep.
Charleston area too, so you guys should connect.
Yep. She said low country. There's a reason why we're called low country.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, it doesn't change the way that I prepare, but I do think it's just a good idea to have an idea of what's going on in the world. And we're just talking about basically some news articles and scientific uh, articles that it came from, as just, filling in the gaps of all the possible things. I mean, we have earthquakes in your area, possibly, Sarge. I know we've talked about that before. We've got volcanoes, we've got tornadoes for some people. We've got all these things going on. This is just one of the things that we have to be, or we should be aware of to some degree. So it's not a surprise.
Yeah. And the first part of that would be, I mean, that would be your harbinger. That would be your, if that happens in our lifetime, I think you're going to see a lot of people in coastal areas start to think about getting out of Dodge.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do have some simulated city impacts if you're interested, or do you want to get to that
Yeah.
later?
No, please. I'm sure that the folks who are here would love to know.
All right. So some of my research comes from different parts of the web. But if global sea level to rise by 4 feet, it would have some pretty big impacts on the coastal communities around the world. Coastal flooding, low-lying areas would be at risk of increased flooding. Storm surges and high tides would be much higher than they currently are. This would destroy a lot of homes and businesses and infrastructure, roads, bridges, things like that are built in those areas. And it would force millions, just in one city, you're talking about millions. So really billions of people to have to relocate. You want to talk about impact on the entire world. Erosion, there would be a lot more erosion. Entire beaches would probably disappear. Saltwater intrusion is another concern. That's if the sea level rises too much, it can start to infiltrate groundwater, and it can have fresh water that's close to coastal regions. Like if there's a lake that's close to coastal regions, if that gets inundated with salt water, it can become brackish, very difficult to work with at that point in terms of making it drinkable. Displacement of people we talked about, economic impacts. If you talk about just if Charleston was to go down, just even our historic district, which is right on the water, if we lose our historic district, that would pretty much put the entire state of South Carolina on a really bad economic spin, because so much money comes into South Carolina through Charleston and Myrtle Beach. So it's not just a coastal issue. It's not just a coastal problem.
Yep.
So at Miami, Florida, one of the most vulnerable cities in the world to sea level rise. Much of the city built on low-lying land that's only a few feet above sea level as it is. A 4-foot rise in sea level would inundate much of the city and cause significant damage to infrastructure and property. New York City is at high risk from sea level rise. Lower Manhattan and Staten Island, especially, a 4-foot rise in sea level would lead to increased flooding and damage from storm surges and hurricanes. Shanghai, China, one of the largest and most populated cities in the world. It's located on the coast of East China Sea. 4-foot rise in sea level there would put much of the city at risk of flooding and have significant economic impacts on the entire world. Mumbai in India, densely populated cities. India is one of the most populated countries in the world as well. Densely populated city located on the coast of the Arabian Sea. 4-foot rise in sea level would cause significant flooding and damage to infrastructure, particularly in the lower lying areas. Lagos, Nigeria, coastal city in West Africa that is already experiencing significant flooding and erosion from sea level rise. 4-foot rise in sea level would have devastating impacts on the city and its population. Amsterdam is located on the coast of the North Sea, is already protected by a sophisticated system of dikes and seawalls. However, a 4-foot rise in sea level could put much of the city at risk of flooding, require significant investments in infrastructure to maintain the city's defenses. New Orleans, obviously that's one on every American's mind because it's constantly at risk of major flooding. New Orleans is a city that is already vulnerable to flooding from hurricanes and storm surges. A 4-foot rise in sea level would increase the risk of flooding, put the city's levees and flood protection systems under greater strain. Savannah, Georgia, coastal city that is vulnerable to flooding from storm surges and hurricanes already. A 4-foot surge in sea level would increase the risk of flooding, cause damage to the city's historic buildings and infrastructure. Charleston, South Carolina, a city that's also already vulnerable to flooding from storm surges and hurricanes. A 4-foot rise in sea level would increase the risk of flooding, damage the city's historic landmarks and tourism industry. So I got more, but those are some of the coastal cities
Wow.
that I searched about.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. Creative redundancy is thinking about Prince Edward Island. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll take a moment here to just share just a little bit from this journal article here. So this is in Nature. Nature is a very high impact journal. And so the research was received in April of 2022, was accepted in November of 2022, and it was published on the 15th of February. So I went through its review process. It's an open access article, so you can look it up and read it if you want. The main authors, Davis, Nichols, Holland et al., are from the British Antarctic Survey, which is in Cambridge, UK, and the Institute of Mathematical Sciences in New York, and the Center for Global Sea Level Change in New York, and a bunch of other places. So the article is called Suppressed Basal Melting in the Eastern Thwaites Glacier Grounding Zone. So I'm just going to just read the abstract here, just to so that everyone doesn't have to necessarily go read the article. It just summarizes the main points. So the Thwaites Glacier is one of the fastest changing ice ocean systems in Antarctica. Much of the ice sheet within the catchment of Thwaites Glacier is grounded below sea level on bedrock that deepens inland, making it susceptible to rapid and irreversible ice loss that could raise the global sea level by more than half a meter. The rate and extent of ice loss and whether it proceeds irreversibly are set by the ocean conditions and basal melting within the grounding zone region where Thwaites Glacier first goes afloat, both of which are largely unknown. Here we show using observations from a hot water drill access hole. So that's where they drilled. It was about the size of a basketball, the hole itself, and they use hot water to drill it. They use a PlayStation controller, and they put a robot down there. They noticed that the grounding zone of the Thwaites eastern ice shelf is characterized by a warm and highly stable water column with temperatures substantially higher than the in situ freezing point. So in situ, the in-place freezing point. So as we were talking about before, like a couple degrees warmer. And that was the surprise, that the water down there was so warm. Despite these warm conditions, low current speeds and strong density stratification in the ice ocean boundary layer actively restrict the vertical mixing of heat towards the ice base, resulting in strongly suppressed basal melting. Our results demonstrate that the canonical model of ice shelf basal melting used to generate sea level projection cannot reproduce observed melt rates beneath this critically important glacier, and that rapid and possibly unstable grounding line retreat may be associated with relatively modest basal melt rates. So there's all sorts of stuff that they're not able to calculate from this research, but they did notice that water underneath is really warm. There's a lot of cracks. There's a lot of flowing of the water, and there's a scalloped appearance to the ice itself. And then the chain reaction, as you get more and more melting, that would cascade, and then releasing the surrounding glaciers, like Sarge had mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a good question here. Geomagnetic Earthwatch. You can certainly probably be in a better position to answer that than I could. Asking about the volcanoes under
Yes.
West End.
Yes. So that's a whole different topic. Good to see you, Brian. Yeah, I have considered those volcanoes. I've worked on this type of stuff in the past. There are a whole bunch of subglacial volcanoes in Antarctica that have erupted like during the Quaternary period in the last couple million years. So that is definitely a topic of interest. But in this discussion we're having right here is about one particularly unstable piece of ice on the west side of Antarctica. However, you bring up a very good point that there are volcanoes that they have determined more recently to be a bit more active than they thought that they were going to be, that would definitely contribute to a lot of freshwater melting of the ice for sure. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
So I want to jump back to something that you were talking about a little while ago, where we know that the oceans in the United States were much further inland at one point in the planet's history, and glaciers covered most of North America, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was hiking in the foothills in Kentucky with a friend, and we went off trail quite a bit actually. And my friend saw something underneath her foot, and so she kind of just like scraped it with her boot, and it was an oyster shell, which like an ocean oyster shell, which had there's left over from whenever there was ice there, because if it was on trail you could say, okay, maybe somebody had planted it there for somebody to find. It was
Mm-hmm.
way off trail. We were out in the middle of the woods in a foothill. Was a pretty cool thing to find.
Wow. So
Yeah,
did you leave it or did you collect it?
I
Curious.
wanted it, she kept it.
Yeah, nice. Oh, that's awesome.
Cool little fossil.
That is cool. Well, are there any other points in the chat? Um,
And I
if
did some research on like also what can we possibly do. We can hit on that I guess near the end if you want.
hmm Yeah, okay. No, that's great. I find there's people are asking questions and then answering them in the chat to each other, so it's really cool. I'll definitely have to go back and check it out later and read all the comments.
I think somebody
Um,
asked how big the glacier itself is. From what I understand, it's about the size of Florida.
yeah, and I read that Antarctica, like that, all of it is about the size of Britain or something. It's because we're talking about just the Thwaites Glacier,
Just the
right?
Thwaites
Yeah,
Glacier.
yeah, um, yeah, exactly. It's big. It's real big. That's why we wanted to show the video at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, exactly. I'm just checking out the chat here. I I see my mother Sparks comment. That's funny. You're so nice. Let's turn that back on. So yeah, what other ideas do you want to share, Sarge?
Well, I did ask about California, and California is also at a risk of sea level rise, as long as its long coastline and low-lying coastal areas are vulnerable to flooding and erosion. The state is already experiencing the impacts of sea level rise. And anybody who's been watching the news right now sees that like California is really having a tough time this winter with between storms, snowstorms, and flooding. It's just been crazy. Um, According to the report by the California Ocean Protection Council, global sea level is expected to rise by 4.6 feet by the year 2100. By the year 2100, so 80 odd years away, under a high emissions scenario. This would result in the loss of over 480,000 homes and businesses in California, as well as significant economic losses due to flooding and infrastructure damage. To address these risks, California has taken a lot of steps to prepare for sea level rise and mitigate its impacts. The state has developed a comprehensive sea level rise guidance document and established a statewide network of sea level rise experts and stakeholders to coordinate planning efforts. Additionally, many cities and communities in California have developed their own sea level rise adaptation plans and are implementing measures such as beach nourishment, seawalls, and relocation of vulnerable infrastructure and populations. However, more needs to be done to address the risks of sea level rise in California and other vulnerable coastal areas around the world. This will require continued efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, mitigate the impacts of climate change, as well as investments in adaptive measures to protect vulnerable communities and infrastructure. And again, we're not interested in making a debate about greenhouse emissions or whatever. This is just the ocean temperatures rising. That's a fact. So there's no point at this point in debating what's causing it unless we're going to all get on board with saying like, hey, we're going to reduce this in some way. I did do a little research on like what could be done, and specifically for this one, I was focusing on Charleston because that's where I live. And I was looking at the most catastrophic situation, which would be like a 17-foot plus rise in sea level. So protecting a city like Charleston against a 17-foot rise in sea level would be a daunting challenge. There's some measures that could help mitigate the potential impacts. Building seawalls and levees, which there is talk of that in my community, but it's tied up in a lot of politics. I think, unfortunately, my state is very slow to respond to situations. There's more talk than action a lot of times. So I don't have a lot of faith that seawall will get done before it's needed to be there. Constructing seawalls and levees around the city's vulnerable areas could help protect against flooding and erosion. This would require significant investments and could have negative impacts on the city's environment and aesthetics. And there's part of the politics right there, is people don't want a big seawall in front of their $5 million mansion. And it's not just the mansions. I shouldn't say it like that. It's not just the mansions. Although that is part of the politics here. Elevating buildings and infrastructures, elevating the buildings to higher levels above the ground could protect against flooding and other impacts of rising sea levels. This could be particularly important for critical infrastructure like hospitals and emergency response facilities. I will say there is work being done around that because some of our hospitals lie in very low-lying areas here in Charleston, and there is active efforts to do what they can about that situation, including improving drainage and things like that. Relocating critical infrastructure such as hospitals and water treatment plants, promoting greener infrastructure, including the use of wetlands, mangroves, could help mitigate the impacts of sea levels. I will tell you that's not going to happen in my city. Everybody here that is concerned about the environment is talking about how they just keep taking away the green area and building more giant apartment complexes here. And that's going to continue to happen by every indication. They're just going to continue to wipe out every wetland, every swamp, and they're going to pave over it and put an apartment complex here, which puts our city at even greater risk. Limiting greenhouse gas emissions was ultimately the most, by some of the research I read, the most efficient way to protect against the impacts of sea level rise, to limit greenhouse gas emissions, mitigate the causes of climate change. This will require significant action on the local, national, and global levels. I mean, that would require, a global cooperation, which is hard to see at this point that we would be able to get every significant industrial nation to come to terms with this. I don't see that happening. Mm-hmm. And then developing new technologies, some way to capture carbons and slow down the rate of sea level rise is also being looked at.
Yeah.
The problem the problem with seawalls and levees is, and I'm sure you know this, like all you're doing is you're pushing the water to somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So if Charleston builds, this is oversimplification, but if Charleston builds a giant seawall, right, or Miami builds a giant seawall, the water doesn't suddenly disappear; it just gets pushed elsewhere, right? So maybe it's your neighbor, you destroy your neighboring communities, but you save yourself, right? So and you see this along the Mississippi, right, where areas that have built levees and dams and things like this are better protected. A mile down the road, a community is flooded.
Yeah, exactly. There's always some outcome. There's always some result of doing that kind of work that is going to affect a neighboring community. So Indivisible Man says, let us know in advance of the next topic so I have time for a literature review. All right. Well, I like it. I like it. And Lori in Alberta is saying tectonic activity will affect California more than sea level rise. There is a significant earth fault all the way to the Juan de Fuca plate. Yes, that is true. But there's just so many layers of factors of what's going on right now. And so there is a tectonic situation, there's sea level rise, which is measurable at the moment. It's happening. Like this is just an acceleration potential, but it already is measurable. And that's why one of these things that's why one of the reasons we were so interested in this topic is because it's just observation. It's based on observations and data collection of this drilling that they did on this glacier and the results that after about a year they were able to publish and we can read them.
And Ban Everything has a great comment there. The world climate will continue to change. It's humans have been around. Civilization's been around for maybe 7,000 years. Homo sapien humans, 300,000 years or so. Prior to that, like the dinosaurs lived on this planet much longer than humans have. There will be, I assume that some humans would survive a catastrophic event like this, even if we're talking like biblical flood kind of thing. But the climate will change. That's correct. I mean, at one point, continents that are not connected were connected. Much of the United States was covered in ocean water, and then glaciers too. So that will continue to happen. It is interesting that it's happening at a time when we can observe and record it and hopefully slow things down and prolong, humans' existence. Some of that might be out of our hands,
Yeah, so we just need to be prepared.
Yep.
Just
Do what you
checking out.
can. Do what you can.
Yeah. And just have a bit of an idea what's going on and not worry about it too much. Dragon Slayer is worried that they will not survive a biblical flood because they cannot swim that well.
Can you build a boat?
Well, is there anything else that you wanted to add, Sarge, from your research?
Yeah, it's just something like you said for people to be aware of. My hope is that I don't see this in my lifetime. Can I say that with high confidence? I wish I could, you know. Uh, the second part of it, the more catastrophic part of it, all the ice that's being held back, sounds like that would be a longer process, not as sudden as the Thwaites Glacier. So 4 foot level rise in the sea level is going to be pretty bad, but a 21-foot rise in sea level is something I don't think I want to see.
Yep.
That's it's going to be bad if that happens. And if it's truly hundreds of years away, then maybe we have time to change it, or maybe the planet's cycle changes things, or there's possibilities that are still out there. And like you said, there's still variables that are unaccounted for because we don't have a way to measure them.
Yeah. Yeah, so we just keep on going, and the AI will probably get to us first.
Yeah. So there is just to kind of wind it down, I guess, a little bit. There's bigger, more immediate risks, I think.
Yes.
This is just another one to kind of be aware of. Just like I don't really think about EMPs all day. Some people do. I don't really think
Yep.
about that all day long. I don't think about. I know you and I did one about earthquakes. It's certainly a concern for me, but it's not something I think about every day. What do I think about every day? I'm very worried about the wars that are going on and the
Yep.
tension that's going on with some of our long-term trade partners that we don't want that relationship to fall apart. A big global war like that is not going to be a good thing. And more immediate than that, I'm worried about the economy and its impact on people.
Yeah, and I mean even more immediate than that, I'm worried about some gnats that are in my on my underground herbal garden at the
Oh
moment,
no.
which I am getting with hydrogen peroxide. So I'm just kind of joking around here, but I think that we approach this topic with curiosity in the sense that it's something going on in the world and it's a fun, earth science topic. I'm not overly concerned about it, but it's something to be aware of. And um, Sun Owl had asked, like, what about Vancouver Island? Vancouver Island has a lot of topography, so of course the shores would be affected, but it's quite a hilly place. So, um, and it was very funny because Sun Owl says, "LOL." Well, that's a relief that it's probably not too bad in the immediate future.
Have you tried neem oil for your gnats?
I use neem oil on things, but I haven't tried it for my gnats, so I will.
And
Because
when
go
I've
ahead.
had that before, spray a little bit on the soil, the top of the soil too.
Yeah, for their eggs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
I know.
Okay.
Financial collapse concerns and the banking. Yeah, that's a pretty immediate concern right now, especially when you think about SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, basically failing at the end of the week, causing a pretty catastrophic drop on our stock market, which I won't be surprised if that continues into next week. If you see a couple more banks go down, that's really bad news. That's really bad news, especially if it's the big banks.
Yeah, it is very bad. And I feel like Prepper Dog may have covered this. I haven't seen his video today or yesterday, but it seems like something I will definitely head to his channel to hear about for
Yeah,
sure.
I need a little bit more information too. I'm not exactly sure what caused the SVB collapse, other than like the little blurb that the news has done on it, which I didn't think gave a great explanation of it. And Prepper Dog, maybe you can jump in and chat there. Was it basically just they had overextended themselves with lending out money and didn't have the assets to cover it when people were trying to withdraw their money? I mean.
Yeah, we'll give him a second to answer that if he wants to. And we've got some great comments here. I'm gonna have to go back and read everything so I can actually fully read it. But I do appreciate each and every one of you that have stuck with us and explored this topic. It's sort of our geology series that just things that are interesting in the world. And it looks like Prepper Dog has commented.
Yeah. They asked investors to help shore up a large shortfall in money. But do you know, Prepper Dog, what caused the shortfall in money? Was it like what I'm saying, that they had all these big loans out to tech companies, and when people needed money, they couldn't get it? Is that what caused the big problem? Yeah, and then you're right. And then the bank run is when we all start trying to take out our money at the same time, and then they definitely can't cover it.
Mhm.
The tech companies, so Indivisible Man says the tech companies that borrowed from the bank burned their cash and couldn't maintain their deposits.
Mhm. Well, yeah, they didn't cover that. Prepper Dog's saying they didn't cover that part in the media very well.
Yeah.
So hopefully more will come out, and we'll definitely turn to channels like Prepper Dog to get more information as well. And SVB had to sell bonds to cover withdrawals.
Yeah. Yeah. And Pioneer Spirit asked about the magnetic poles. Have you covered that before?
Um, I haven't done a video about that, but have you?
I've not. I know. I think it was Survival Living did one
Yeah,
that I thought was pretty well done.
yeah. Maybe I'll add a link to that video in the comments in case anyone's here for the replay. We'll put the link to Survival Living's video covering that down below. And if there are any ideas, if people want to participate in any of these Earth-related topics in the future, just let us know, because it's fun to just read the literature and see what's happening um, out there. I've worked on quite a few of the alpine glaciers in the past, but never been to Antarctica, so that would
Can
be
you
cool.
can you talk about a little bit about what your research was on those?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a while ago, but we did inventory of glaciers across Western Canada. So we would go and we'd look at satellite data to figure out their size, and then we would relate that to their little ice age maximum, so the size that they were in their most recent advance, and then there'd be a calculation to determine how much of that um, had been gone, because and we would ground truth the size of the glaciers based on what we were able to map digitally. So we would walk around and we would physically map these things, and we did a whole bunch of them to figure out, for example, were they melting faster in the east or faster in the west, and collecting a lot of data. We also would look for old forests that had been knocked down by advancing glaciers. So what we would do is we'd go to these alpine moraines, and we would, so in these big mountains, a lot of them are in the Cascades and the volcanoes down in the U.S. There are these big glacial moraines, and we would inspect the sides of these moraines to find old wood mats. So in the past, the glaciers had advanced and they had knocked forests down. And so what we would do is we'd collect the wood from these wood mats, and then we would radiocarbon date it to figure out the, the timing of when that wood was killed. And we can also look at the tree ring data from those pieces of wood to match it with record, because as you know, I'm sure like uh, all the tree rings correlate. Like a tree from 1900 has a
Mhm.
certain size ring depending on like the moisture and the climate and all this stuff, so you can match it to the tree rings. And then we would figure out when those advances would happen, and we would try to work out the climate history using these little pieces of the puzzle. So um, we would map the glaciers to find out their size and how much volume was lost, and we would look for evidence of previous glaciations. And so there was a lot of field mapping involved and looking for wood. Sometimes we would look downstream of the glacier to find out if we could find bits of wood that have washed out of the glacier, and then we collect that and we radiocarbon that too, date that too, because it was giving you basically its time of death. So those are just a couple of the things that we did for glacier work.
That's really cool stuff. How old were these trees that you're talking about?
Um, oh gosh, they could be, well, a lot of them were like Little Ice Age, so like in the 1800s. But there was some really old stuff as well, from previous advances. And yeah, I fell in one of the glaciers once, and um,
How far
it was. Hmm?
how far down did you go?
Just a couple meters. I was on a rope, but I had to get rescued, and then we another team of glacier travelers came and they rescued me, and then we ended up getting out, and then I went to this little it was near Banff, and I went to a little lodge, and I called my mom, and I had told her I had just gotten rescued out of a glacier, that I had fallen in a crevasse it was actually a crevasse rescue course I was on when it happened, ironically.
Wow.
And she was like, "Oh yeah, that's nice." I was like, "Okay." And I was like, it was so traumatizing, but
Wow. You have had such an adventurous life.
well, not so much. at the moment, but in the past. But anyways, that was a bit of a tangent, but oh wow, there's so much good stuff going on in the chat. I can't wait to go and read it. Any final words, Sarge? I'll let you go. I know it's been a while.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you doing this stream with me. It's definitely a very interesting topic, and it was kind of cool seeing all the new research that came out in February. And it's really cool to have a friend who's a scientist who understands this stuff.
Well, it's there's so many different channels with little things that they can add to this, and I look forward to reading what everybody says and following up on some of that those further ideas.
Yeah, I think people were really interested and scared by your falling in the glacier story there. Basically, I'm reading the chat.
Oh, I haven't seen it. I mean, I could tell sometimes I could tell the actual story because
you gave us the
well,
quick version.
Okay, I'll give you the quick version. Okay, so it was up near like the Peyto Glacier, near Banff and like that area of the world, and we were crossing. I was on a 6-person team, so I was a 5th person on the 6-person rope team. So, and I'll post pictures after this. Okay, so the stream is essentially over. If no one, thank you, Sarge. So this is like off topic.
Yeah.
So we were walking. There were 2 groups of 6, sort of 12 of us, and we were on a multi-day hike. So we had to go to cross different glaciers, and then we would stay in huts, and then we would cross more glaciers, and then in the meantime, we would learn skills for rescuing people out of crevasses. So we were walking, and I will post photos of this later since it's come up. And basically, you expect that the crevasses cross a glacier in a certain orientation. So we thought that the crevasses were like perpendicular to the line that we were walking. So the first person in this line of 6 people was walking along just fine. The second person they stepped in like a bit of a deeper snow. And then the third person kind of fell in a little bit deeper. Like the snow was just kind of really soft. And then when I got to it, the person in front of me had like made quite a hole. And I have a picture of the hole. So I got up and I looked and I saw a hole. And it was a black hole. So basically it was a glacier with snow on top. And so I saw this hole and I thought if I kind of got a run at it, I could jump it and
Oh
land on
no.
the glacier. So I did. And I ran, but when I landed on the snow on the other side of the whole thing collapsed and I fell a couple meters down. And so there was a rope behind me and a rope in front of me, and I was actually on strike with the glacier, or sorry, on strike with the crevasse. So I was hanging by a rope, like I had a harness on. So there's a rope behind me and a rope in front of me, and all I could see is it's like a pick. It's a crevasse. So it's this black like hole in the ice.
Mm-hmm.
And the rope in front of me was going like along with the crevasse and then up to the snow. So there was a snow layer on top of the crevasse and it was cutting in like a zipper towards the next person. So the 6th person and the 4th person, they set up ice screws and they like sat in place and they got themselves situated. And I had a multi-day backpack on and I was falling like deeper because it kept letting go. It kept like eating into the snow on either side. And I kept getting farther and like you get wedged in there and then your body heat like melts you into the glacier. So the scariest part of it was, well, there's 2 things that were the scariest part of it. One was, well, 3 things. One was that I kept dropping farther and farther.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I could see the rope in front and behind me. The other part was I couldn't hear nothing. it was completely silent because the snow and the ice insulated me. So any conversation happening up above me, I couldn't hear. And then because there was a risk of one or the other on the team, either behind me or in front of me, also falling in, and then we're like done. They couldn't move. So the only way that I could get rescued is if somebody came perpendicular to where we were in a line and rescued me out the side. So
Wow.
they did. So another team came. I don't know how long it was till they got back to us. So they came the other way and then they um, lowered down a rope and carabiner to attach. But I was so wedged in, like it was really hard to attach the carabiner. And then when they got me out of the glacier, it was a stormy day, which we shouldn't have been out there, but it was multi-days, so you just kind of do what you're doing.
Mm.
Um, I still had to hike out of there. That's the point. It's like, okay, so you're rescued and you're done and you're fine, but you don't just get to go and like sit in a hut and feel better about yourself. You're in the middle of a glacier, and I still have to walk across the rest of the glacier to get out. And that part I didn't like because I was like, what if it happens again? What if I fall in another one?
Yeah. Wow.
Anyway, so we ended up um, finishing our thing. I wasn't injured, um, but so that's what happened.
Wow. That thank you for sharing that. That is crazy. You must have been so scared.
Yeah, I was scared. And then I was doing that course to go work on more glaciers. So I
Yeah.
had definitely a complex working on falling in stuff, definitely.
Wow. Do you ever get bad dreams about it or anything like that?
No, not that in particular. Other
No.
stuff, but not that. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
not that one.
that's crazy. You're like Lara Croft, Tomb
No, no, no. And
Raider.
that's like that's a young. Hey, Red Reaper, good to see you. That's a younger version of me. I'm like old and boring now. That was a different version.
Yeah, I find that as I'm getting older, I'm definitely playing it a lot more safe with stuff that I wouldn't have before.
Yeah.
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 Well, thank you for this. This was such a fun stream, and I learned a ton from you. And yeah, I think we both agree it's not something to necessarily put at the top of your list of like I got to figure out a plan for this, but it is something
Yeah.
to be aware of. And if people watch this and they enjoyed this, maybe because it will come up in the news again at some point, and they'll have a little bit of knowledge going into that.
Yeah, it's just awareness of topics going on, and it's Antarctica is important.
Yeah.
Just because it's hidden down on the bottom of Earth doesn't mean we shouldn't care about it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. Anyone who's still here, thanks for sticking with us. And definitely join up with Sarge on his channel as well as on Instagram. You will not be disappointed. He's got some great content there. You'll learn lots about foraging, survival, bushcraft, current events, mental health,
Yep.
you name it.
A little bit of everything.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate your time. Okay. Bye bye.
Bye, everybody.